Good morning. You're listening to Retake Our Democracy, a 30-minute weekly show that airs at 8:30 a.m. each Saturday morning on KSFR 101.1 FM, your Santa Fe public radio station. And if you don't live near Santa Fe, you can stream the show live from ksfr.org. I'm Paul Gibson, the host of Retake Our Democracy. Today we're going to have a very special show as it's Pledge Week, and it's Pledge Week is kicking off this morning at KSFR. So our listeners get an opportunity to set a tone for contributions to their public radio station. I'll be speaking with Mariel Nanasi, Executive Director of New Energy Economy, and Gary Coffin, who is an attorney who has helped prepare filings and briefs at the PRC on behalf of Indivisible Albuquerque and Retake Our Democracy. He is an active member of Indivisible Albuquerque, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Gary has been examining the implications of what appear to be important violations of the Open Meetings Act as relates to the Avangrid hearing that may be coming to the PRC to re-examine their denial of their merger. And while that may sound boring, I've already talked to Gary a little bit about Open Meetings Act, and what was done in those meetings is nothing short of like duplicitous. So buckle up. We've got Mariel who's going to be talking about Avangrid. We're going to be talking about public radio, and we're going to have fun because this is Pledge Week. We'll get to Gary and Mariel in just a second, but I got to do a couple quick announcements first. Last week, I spoke with Dr. Eric Griego Montoya, former New Mexico State Senator, former candidate to U.S. Congress, and one of the co-founders of New Mexico's chapter of the Working Families Party. He has just completed his dissertation focused on cooperative work structures, and we spoke about a Zoom panel conversation Eric moderated this past week with a handful of national and international leaders in the worker cooperative movement. Eric and I had plenty to talk about, so the interview is well worth your time. The week prior, I interviewed Robert Jensen, an author, blogger, and environmental activist. With Wes Jackson, he is the co-author of An Inconvenient Apocalypse, Environmental Collapse, Climate Crisis, and the Fate of Humanity. It's not a comedy. And he publishes a most compelling and personal blog on his experience of our unfolding climate crisis. It was a remarkable conversation, and one I highly recommend you check out. We're going to have him back real soon. Fortunately, it is real easy for you to check out those past interviews and today's. If you're driving around and you miss any of today's interview, you can go back to your computer and log on to retakeourdemocracy.org and click on the Retake on the Radio button on the right side of the homepage. And all of our shows are listed in chronological order. And Retake takes a good deal of pride in securing good guests like today. That provide compelling information for you. So while you're on the page, scroll through, you may find some other interviews you'd be interested in watching. Okay, so the only other thing I need to acknowledge is that we are conducting this show on stolen Tewa land. I always like to acknowledge that. And I always like to acknowledge their cultivation and shepherdship of our land, air, and water. We need to learn from them. They're great stewards, and we aren't. So let's try and learn from them and see if we can't do a better job. Okay, let's get started. Welcome, Mariel and Gary. Let's talk Avangrid, an issue with more lives than hydrogen. I always like to let our guests introduce themselves. So how about each of you take a minute to tell us who you are, how your activism has shifted over the years, and how you became involved in opposing the Avangrid merger. First you, Mariel, and then Gary. Go.
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much, Paul and Retake Our Democracy, for existing and for doing this radio show on fabulous KSFR, and also for weighing in on this extraordinarily important issue that could have impacts for New Mexico for decades to come, impacting the majority of the people in New Mexico. So I am Mariel Nanasi. I'm the Executive Director of New Energy Economy. I'm a mom. I'm an activist. I'm an attorney. And some people now call me a utility lawyer, and I take on P&M and try to hold them accountable to really the main priority is to move as quickly as possible away from fossil fuel dependence and towards renewables. But that includes very importantly, taking them on around money, because that's why they haven't made that move, and that's why they're making that move at a snail's pace. And so that has, gotten me into things like reading, stock and investor presentations and things like that, because that's where they live. So when Avangrid first started to come here with their beautiful 3-leaf logo, I actually was pretty excited. I was like, oh, they're going to be better than P&M, and maybe their takeover of P&M would be a good thing for New Mexico. But and P&M ratepayers in particular. But the more I learned and the more I dug in as part of my legal duties in the case, the more I found out that that they would be worse than P&M here. And the primary thing about why we ended up opposing the Avangrid Iberdrola merger with P&M is because really it was theirs to lose. They could not overcome their own track record of outages and unreliability, diminished service quality, more than $65 million in penalties and violations, and their failure to abide by regulatory authority and law in other places that they operate in the Northeast. And then there's some other criteria that had to be looked at in the merger context, in the utility legal context. And that was two other important things, and then I'll pass it to Gary, is the risk of subsidization of non-utility activities, meaning are they going to use their P&M platform as a way for them to invest in their private goals that they were going to use to export, essentially wind and solar by affiliate baby companies that they would create and export those profits out of state. And then the last thing is significant reduction in local control, which I also do believe was a problem. So those are the reasons why we opposed it. And there's lots more that I'm sure that we'll talk about. So thank you so much for having me. And my friend, Gary Coffin with Indivisible Albuquerque.
Thank you, Mariel. And I will second her quote that Paul, the work that you and Retake Our Democracy does has it really livens my spirits. I can't say thank you enough for what you've done to Santa Fe and to hold politicians accountable, and not just to hold politicians accountable, but also let the public know what's going on behind the scenes. I think that's how the sausage is made is how things move, and it's how the world ticks. And so the more information that we all have, the better off we are.
Thank you.
And with that, yeah, my pleasure. My name is Gary Coffin, and I am the co-founder and current vice president of Indivisible Albuquerque. I'm also an attorney, and I'm not sure what comes first, so whether I'm an attorney first or vice president of Indivisible Albuquerque, because they both we work hard on both endeavors. And at Indivisible Albuquerque, we really focus on transparency. I mean, that's what we want to see. When we first formed our meetings, it was a time of, well, Trump was just elected, and there was a lot of fear in that room in our initial meeting, probably well over 100 people coming together, and there was a palpable fear in the room. And a group of us got together and decided, well, what do we do with this energy? And we felt that educating the masses and getting people connected with politicians so they could know people on a first name basis and kind of collapse the distance between Santa Fe and the politicians that represent us. And that was our goal. And we've continued to move forward and strive under those ideas.
And you do a great job at it. So, and thank you for introducing Indivisible Albuquerque also. Mariel, can you tell us just a little bit about new energy economy? I think our listeners probably know, so they probably don't need too much of a history.
Yeah, new energy economy is it's about a 15-year-old organization, and that we work on finding climate solutions, bold climate solutions to address the challenges that we face, which are many. And so mostly we work in the electric sector, trying to decarbonize it and make it more equitable for people. And that's where our main focus is. And so we work in the Public Regulation Commission and the New Mexico Supreme Court mostly, but we do work on oil and gas issues, and we have solarized in partnership with community partners all over the state to solarize important community buildings. And actually our next one is going to be with Major Market on Zuni Pueblo. So that's going to be coming up in probably May or June. So watch out for that. But people can go to newenergyeconomy.org to learn more.
Okay. So, and I can tell you there's never a dull moment at New Energy Economy. They've got their fingers in so many pies. So now that we know each other, let's dive into this Avangrid thing. Without going into too much detail, Mariel, can you tell us exactly how we wound up in this space again? I mean, I thought we were done with Avangrid last year, and here they are back. So tell us what the deal is.
So we won, and you were right. And it really was with partners like Indivisible Albuquerque and Retake Our Democracy, and, 2 or 3 dozen other organizations, grassroots organizations all over the state, but primarily in PNM territory, really opposing. But there were people like Renewable Taos and other friends who, and Taos progressives, and who waited and said, this is outrageous. No, we don't need colonization 2.0. What we need is local choice energy. What we need is public power. And we won. And despite all odds, we won. And it was an incredible, incredible victory. I like to think of it as my gift of love back to New Mexico, literally the land, which I love this place. And so this was like a way for me to give back to New Mexico. And that was so many of us lawyers and activists and organizers came out against the Avangrid Iberdrola buyout of PNM. So it's really important for you all to know that the PRC received 500 to 1 public comments against this merger. And so I didn't even know that until after we won, but that's how active the grassroots were. And we won, and the hearing examiner wrote a meticulous 455 page opinion that was scathing. And the PRC, the elected PRC, 5 individuals, a bipartisan decision from all of representing the state of New Mexico, decided unanimously to reject the merger. And so it was a huge victory for the people of New Mexico. And then they appealed. PNM and Avangrid and Iberdrola appealed. And so, yes, New Energy Economy intervened to defend our victory, as did the then PRC. And we, in the normal course of any appeal, filed a brief, and we are like an inch away from having oral argument and proceeding with the appeal. But then, as many of you know, the PRC changed and went from an elected body to an appointed body. And the PRC appointed persons were appointed by the governor, and there were 3 people. One of whom has recused himself. So now there are two people, one from Los Alamos, who has no regulatory experience, and the other one who just moved to Santa Fe, who does have some regulatory experience, but nobody has any merger experience in their background, who are going to decide this case. Maybe. So what they did in an extraordinarily unusual manner is that Avangrid went to go meet with the PRC and decide behind closed doors that they were going to file a joint motion. And so, PNM and Avangrid were on one side, the PRC and New Energy Economy were on the other. And now the PRC and PNM and Avangrid have jointly moved to dismiss the appeal and to rehear the merger case. And they did that all behind closed doors. That's where we're at right now. And they have made that motion. New Energy Economy has opposed. And again, unusually, even the parties who were part of the merger hearing beforehand have intervened, and every single party has said, if this does come back, you must ensure that due process considerations happen if it comes back to the PRC. And that's not what PNM and Avangrid and the PRC planned on. They planned on a rubber stamp procedure. And I don't think that will happen.
So let's hear from Gary for a couple of minutes here, at least. Gary, can you tell us? I know that the what Mariel was talking about in terms of behind closed doors is the violation of the Open Meetings Act. Can you tell us about that and why that's so important, and maybe some of the things that were arranged during those private meetings?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I had said earlier, for Indivisible Albuquerque, transparency really is everything to us. And, the purpose of the Open Meetings Act is to ensure that the public's business is done in public. I mean, it's really that simple. And, for Indivisible Albuquerque, we understand that it's hard enough to fight against something that you may disagree with when it's done publicly, but it becomes almost impossible to fight against something that's done behind closed doors. And that's why New Mexico legislature has passed laws that say that public bodies need to do things open and honest in the public forum. And that's not what the PRC did here. The PRC actually met, I believe, behind closed doors. Don't quote me if I'm wrong on this, but somewhere between 5 and 7 times. And their excuse for meeting behind closed doors is that this dealt with pending litigation, and it was attorney-client privilege. That's what they stated. We really don't know what happened during those meetings, but what I do know is what the outcome of those meetings were. And the outcome of those meetings were that the PRC somehow has changed their direction from their previous ruling. They had taken what was an adversary and made them a bedfellow. And that was not done in public. So sure, they may have had meetings with their attorney to make some decisions, but by changing the public body's course, that required an open meeting. And that never happened. Because the public has a right to hear if the PRC is going to change course and they're going to take action, that those votes need to be done in public. Even if it's only 2 commissioners voting, the 2 commissioners need to post the meeting and have the hearing in public so people can respond, and the PRC can be held accountable for the decisions that they're making. But right now, I think they're avoiding all of that.
And so what are you seeing as some of the implications or outcomes as a result of this? And in particular, you mentioned a quote from the CEO from Avangrid.
Well, interestingly enough, it was Iberdrola who made the quote, and it was done in a Spanish newspaper in Spain. One of our big issues with the merger is that Spain is going to have control over our utility here in New Mexico. And I'm not sure how we feel about that. I can tell you that at least with PNM, we have local control. And, while PNM is not perfect. It's better than being controlled by a mega conglomerate that is located in Spain. And they're feeling the pressure of the cost of this merger. The company is. It's cost them a lot of money. And to settle the investors, he said, don't worry, we got this figured out. And we have a solution to this merger. New Mexico will move forward. That's a paraphrase, but that's basically what he said. And he's saying that out loud to his investors in order to create stability for the people that invest in Iberdrola.
And so apparently they've worked out a whole lot of stuff in these private meetings that we will find out when the hearings begin. And what were some of the conditions of the returning it to the PRC that are so egregious?
Well, you know, that's the interesting thing is we can, the PRC can you know, move the Supreme Court and say, please give us back this decision so we can rehear it. But what they're asking the Supreme Court to do is not just give it to us so we can rehear it again. They're asking them to order them to kind of find a loophole in the administrative code that will allow them to hear it without any due process. And that's really what's so horrible about this request from the PRC is the PRC is saying, look, we want to change this decision. Well, they haven't really said which way they're going to go, but it seems apparent. You know, give us this decision back to us so we can review it and decide whether we need to change course. But don't worry about the timelines that the administrative code and the New Mexico statutes say that we have to comply with. We're going to go ahead and waive those and allow us to do this without hearing new evidence.
Okay, well, we'll get back to that in just a second, but I mentioned earlier it's Pledge Week, and so I want to give my spiel on why I think you should make a donation to KSFR. Hearing all of what you're hearing right now, this is information you're not going to get in mainstream media. And if you get it in social media, it's going to be on New Energy Economy or Indivisible's Facebook page, but there'll be a ton of misinformation out there coming from the utilities, including PNM. And so it's at KSFR is more important than ever in these times of misinformation and in the mainstream and social media and in most political rhetoric as well. So you don't find the straight information almost anywhere except in public radio and public media. In the face of that misinformation, KSFR offers timely news and alerts and a wide range of programming to keep you informed and sane. In an era replete with misinformation at KSFR, you get the straight scoop, fact-based news from Amy Goodman on Democracy Now!, a European view on the news from the BBC, and KSFR's own state and local news, great music, and informative discussions on timely issues, from Economic Update with Richard Wolff, Retake Our Democracy, and a host of other moderated programs. Seriously, folks, where else can you get an hour of socialist radio every Saturday morning, starting with Richard Wolff and Economic Update and then followed by Retake Our Democracy? You're not going to find that anywhere else. And so if that kind of programming means anything to you, I'd encourage you, once you finish listening to this show, go to ksfr.org, hit the donate button and give them 10, 20, 50, maybe $100. It's Pledge Week. And look at it as your ticket for admission to a great wealth of programming. And on behalf of KSFR, I want to thank you for your generosity. And let's get back to our discussion with Mariel and Gary and our discussion of the potential Avangrid merger, the issue that won't go away. So Gary, you've told us a bit about how the Open Meetings Act has come into play in this and what is transpired possibly as a result, but can we now shift and go over to Mariel and just let's find out exactly how bad Avangrid is. I mean, why are we opposing this so vigorously?
So the important thing is something that again came from Avangrid's own mouth. And that is that the CEO of Avangrid testified under oath. It's funny, you got to listen to people when they say things, and you got to believe them. And he said that their goal was to use P&M as their beachhead, which is a military term to land and from where an attack can be launched. The Avangrid CEO's admission is the view of Iberdrola Avangrid, and that is to use P&M as a platform to consolidate our renewables for production for their financial growth of their subsidiaries, and ultimately the parent, Iberdrola Avangrid. And you should just also know that the two other main owners of Avangrid are Qatar, and BlackRock. So they wanted to use
So just
P&M.
one moment, Mariel. I'm going to have to tell you that our show is almost over. We have 2 minutes. I want to allow time for Gary and you to say something positive about public radio, and then we'll take this discussion onto YouTube and have it available for our listeners on retakeourdemocracy.org. So Gary, first you, tell us something great about public radio.
Public radio is important because we know who's funding it. It's the people, and we know that the funding that keeps these airwaves alive is pure, and we know that we can trust the source. We know where the slant comes from, and it's to me it is the best form of media available.
Okay, Mariel.
And I'll just say that just like we want public power, we thankfully have public radio, and that is the voice of the people. So Gary talked about from where does the money come from, and I'm going to talk about the voice of the people. And we need to have an outlet that isn't about extreme profit at all costs. And that's what this is. This is about, what do the people want? What does New Mexico want? What is good for sustainability, for our life and our livelihoods? And that's what public radio is about. Everything from discussing, what's happening for acequias, or the contamination of our earth, or about jobs, or about schools, or about energy. These are the things that are on the minds of people, and they want to be discussed in a way that's accessible. And KSFR and the other public radios stations are the answer to that question.
Okay, well, I want to just add to that while you might get socialist radio on KSFR, you will never get Avangrid radio or P&M radio. And so that's one of my reasons for supporting KSFR. So we're out of time for today, and I want to thank our guests for being with us. Can you tell us real quickly, Gary, where you can get more information about Indivisible Albuquerque?
IndivisibleAlbuquerque.com is probably the best place to go. We also have a Facebook page. You can find us at Indivisible Albuquerque Events and Actions.
Okay, and Mariel, NEE.org?
NewEnergyEconomy.org. You can also reach us on Facebook as well. And you can email us, and we have lots of information on our website. So please do come by, email us, and participate in our campaigns.
Okay, thank you both very much. We're going to be quiet for about 10 seconds so that the radio station knows where the radio show ends. We'll be back next week. Thank you very much for listening. And go to KSFR and click on donate right now. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, we're back with Mariel Nanasi and Gary Coffin. And Mariel, you were starting to tell us, like what's wrong with Avangrid. How about telling us a little bit about their performance in other countries and states and why we're so concerned about that track record?
I just want to tell you one story. And that was during the hearing. Again, the CEO of Avangrid was being cross-examined about the billing debacle in Maine. And this was over a period of 3 years where there were thousands of customers who either didn't get billed or who were overbilled, had their credit rating just ruined, were disconnected, humiliated, and completely frustrated beyond belief, trying to reach customer service, and there would be literally no answer. And there is actually a class action lawsuit pending about this billing debacle. And when we cross-examined the CEO of Avangrid, he said, you know what? We're sorry. We apologize. We made a mistake. And he didn't acknowledge that the real reason that they initiated this new billing procedure was through orders of Iberdrola, which is something that, you know, Gary raised, which is the loss of local control. But the orders came down from Iberdrola. They implemented this
Iberdrola is
billing.
the parent company, right?
Iberdrola is the parent company of Avangrid, and Avangrid owns the subsidiary called Central Maine Power. And but then he said, you know, I'm really sorry. And you got to feel, you know, everybody makes mistakes, businesses, human beings, except for the fact that it wasn't an anomaly. And if Avangrid Iberdrola's case comes back before the PRC, the real reason that they don't want a hearing based on due process is the very last thing that Gary said. They don't want new evidence to come out. And what that new evidence would be that we've learned since 2021 is right now, like today, there are 2 major investigations going on in New York at the New York Public Utility Corporation, because over 4,600 complaints have been lodged against Avangrid subsidiary for what they have called, not Mariel is calling, what they are calling a billing crisis. And you know, you listen to the videos, if you Google billing crisis New York, you'll find out that they've had public hearings after public hearing where people are complaining, hey, I get a bill for 3 months, and then I got a notice that my electricity was going to be disconnected. Or my bill was $68,000 in 1 month, or over and over and over again. And people frustrated, angry, annoyed, that they couldn't reach customer service. And then not only that, but Scottish Power, an Iberdrola owned utility, same kind of billing crisis. But there, not only were they doing this kind of crazy, chaotic billing, but they were even billing people who weren't even their customers. And then, you know, the bills accumulate and that affects their credit rating. But then in Scotland, they were sending out debt collectors, actual human beings, to follow people around. So I no longer believe that this is just gross incompetence and a problem. It is deliberate malfeasance. And that's just one kind of example of the Avangrid Iberdrola way, their modus operandi, the way they do business is to invest for their shareholders, get extreme profit, and not produce adequate customer service and performance.
So my understanding is that while they like to tout themselves as this great green energy company, they have a track record also of doing everything they can to undermine new renewable energy in Spain, in South America, and in North America. Can you talk about that?
Do you want to go, Gary?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, this great renewable company, if I believe their portfolio has less solar than PNM has. And that's the reality of what we're dealing with. And their CEO testified during the PRC hearings that they're kind of flying by the seat of their pants. If they're going, they're not sure how they're going to do renewable in New Mexico.
I
They
think
just
that
see
was
it.
a direct quote, wasn't it, Gary? We're
It
flying by
was.
the seat of our pants.
Yes, that's exactly. It was a direct quote, and that's where they're
You
at.
can't make this stuff up.
No. The company's atrocious. I mean, and the size of the company makes it impossible for the regulators here in New Mexico to regulate. And that to me is, I think something the PRC initially got right. And I'm not sure how we're missing that at this time. The whole purpose of a regulated monopoly is that monopolies exploit people. That's what monopolies do. And so we need to have a PRC that regulates the monopoly effective. We need people like Mariel and Nanasi to hold the PRC and hold the utility accountable when regulations go awry. And that's really their goal. That's what they see in New Mexico. That's why we're so attractive. It's not only our sun and our wind that they may want, it's also our politicians. It's also a small, public regulation commission that they can exploit and basically operate just like a monopoly would and continue to exploit people. It's all about profit motives. And they see New Mexico as a place to be exploited, a beachhead that they can really just pull our resources out of. And, it's a scary reality. And it's even more scary that the politicians that represent us have set this up and continue to do it, like I said earlier, behind closed doors.
The thing is that, they tout themselves as having these standards, these good government environmental standards. But the fact is that then they go use that money to create front groups. And I mean, Brown University came out with a report that said that they were the #1 obstructor of climate legislation in Connecticut. And there was another outfit that did an independent report that said that they were coming out against the electrification of appliances and were pro-gas. The fact of the matter is, just like Gary said, they have more gas and more nuclear in their portfolio, and they have less than 2% solar. They have some wind, absolutely, and but company. They're into hydrogen. We don't want them here. We don't need them to come here. We want local public power where the people here make the money off of local renewables and not exported or exploited to Spain.
So I just read this week that despite the fact that the whole hydrogen initiative had been blocked in the legislature multiple times in 2022 and didn't even have the nerve to really try and introduce it in 2023 explicitly. They just put money in the budget for it. But the governor announced that Avangrid would be leading the hydrogen hub project for New Mexico. And, that's a $1.4 billion grant from the federal government to develop hydrogen hubs. And can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, that's just insane. That was also a closed door. Is that legal? I mean, shouldn't there have been a bidding process?
I don't know.
Well, that's an interesting.
Go ahead, Mariel. Sorry.
I mean, that whole thing about the RFP and a competitive bidding process is also is an interesting point. But the larger point is, they've only applied for this and they're going to have to get permits, and there are still regulations and that they're going to have to get. And, so we know, unfortunately, that the governor is fiercely in love with hydrogen. This is a bad path for New Mexico in every way. And there's going to end up being stranded assets for the public. And this is another example of, extreme profiteering for the corporations that leave the public holding the bag. We know what the answers are, and the answers are not about extreme profit. They're about let's move New Mexico to 100% renewables and become the renewable capital of the world using New Mexico labor, New Mexico businesses. And once we are on that path, and create local wealth creation, that's going to have a transformational impact that's going to help people, New Mexicans. This other path is all about, investor boondoggles.
So why does this all seem so obvious to us, and yet we keep having to fight these fights over and over again? Is it as simple as the money in politics?
Yeah, I mean, I really do believe that as long as money is speech, or speech is money, as the case may be, right? That money's talks, and that's where we're at. Just like the NRA is super well funded, and make sure that the politicians stay well funded. If a politician, especially one of our main politicians, higher ups in New Mexico, want to stay in office, it costs them a lot of money to do so. And in order to fund those campaigns, you need big money donors. It's possible to do it with small money donors, but it takes a lot more work. And, so warming up to a mega corporation that can market itself as green looks like a good way to bid for your next office. And, it creates problems, and that's where we're at. I mean, welcome to politics in today's times.
So it's interesting.
Yeah,
I had breakfast with a legislator yesterday, and he told me that if you want to understand the governor's vetoes and the governor's actions in the last legislative session, just ask yourself what her donors would want her to do. And then that's where it is. And I have always resisted that. It seems so simplistic, like $25,000 isn't going to buy a governor. But those dollars add up, and nothing else makes any sense about some of the ways she operates. And so it's an interesting concept there. Anyway, I think we'll.
Yeah, if I could just
go ahead.
Can I just share this one comment by Antonia Juhas, and it sort of sums up the last couple of minutes of what we've been talking about. And this is what she said: there is no other natural resource, none, that has ever held the power over war, peace, economies, the fate of nations, presidents, elections, our very climate, and even the price of bread, as do fossil fuels. Eliminating their power is an essential act of peace and resistance.
And who was that by, that quote? Very nice.
Antonia Juhas. She's a pretty amazing reporter. Juhaszz.
Okay. Well, we'll put that quote in something on retake so our listeners can see it. But thank you very much, both of you, for being with us today. This has been very interesting, and I'm sure our listeners appreciate it. We'll be back next week. Thank you, Mariel. Thank you, Gary.
Paul.
Have a good weekend. And thank you for your activism. We'll get this done one way or another.
We'll just keep fighting.
Yep.